sites found all over the Earth. How do the extraterrestrials travel from star to star system with almost no time passing? Ohio Exopolitics is on at 8-10 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio. Join Mark Snyder as he interviews a myriad of excellent guests each Saturday night on Revolution Radio.
And freedomslips.com.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I am going to have two co-hosts for the first hour. Let me welcome Solaris Blue Raven and Thea Appel. Hello, ladies. How are you this evening?
I'm great. Well. Hi, Anthea.
Hi there, Solaris. How you doing?
Good. How are you? I love your kitty picture.
Oh, that's my Burmese.
He's adorable. I have a kitty who kind of looks like that.
He's sweet.
Hi. Yeah. Hey, Mark.
Hello. How are you guys?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm very glad to have you, Solaris. You want to tell people about your shows?
Sure. I have Raven Star's Witching Hour up tonight on freedomslips.com here on Studio A at 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. I'm supposed to have Mike Piper on. I haven't confirmed back with him, but he was scheduled. So that's the plan. If that doesn't happen, I'll open the lines up. And I also have Hyperspace on KCOR Radio out of Las Vegas, Nevada. That's on Friday nights. So if you don't catch me on Saturday, you can go over there at Friday night Eastern Standard Time, 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time on KCOR Radio.
Pretty impressive, Solaris. And Thea, please tell people about your book and your websites.
Oh, well, okay. I have one website. It's catsanddogsnaturally.com. That's because I'm an animal naturopath and a homeopathic and herbal practitioner now. And my book's been out a long, long time. I need to write a new book.
Yes, please. Do you want me to give you some topics? I can give you some topics. Just kidding. Okay. We're going to talk to BartSibrel this evening about the moon landings. However, Bart cannot be with us until about 8:30 p.m. Eastern. So I'm going to play a few clips from several sources. I'm also going to make some statements here in the beginning of the show about the moon landings. And no matter what you think happened on the moon, I think that most people would have to admit there are some very strange things that have gone on in relationship to the trip to the moon. First, why can we not repeat the moon landings, which occurred in the late 1960s and early 70s? Technology is supposed to move forward. However, when it comes to the moon landings, it seems that we have not moved forward at all. With 45 years to improve our technology, still we don't go back to the moon. Second, why has no other country landed men on the moon in the nearly 45 years that have passed since the moon landings took place? Not Russia, not China. No one else has been able to repeat the moon landings. Third, we've lost 14 people in the shuttle missions, and yet on 6 different occasions we traveled over 200,000 miles out into space without losing a single astronaut. What happened? We've lost 14 astronauts in the shuttle that travels up only 400 miles, and yet we can make it to the moon and back without a single loss of life. So why is NASA losing all the data associated to the moon landings? I have heard that some 14,000 reels of telemetry data has been lost. That's the data that tracks the crafts going forward and back to the moon. The plans for the lunar excursion module have been lost by Grumman. The plans for the lunar rover have been lost by Boeing. The plans for the Saturn V rocket have been lost by NASA. And I had Dr. Ken Johnson on the show, who stated that he had been ordered to destroy all of the films and photographs that he had associated to the moon landing. So why is NASA telling its employees to destroy evidence associated to the moon landings? How is Neil Armstrong able to land the LEM on the first try on the moon? However, he crashed the LEM trainer twice here on the Earth. The LEM trainer, the Lunar Excursion Module trainer, never flew successfully on the Earth, and yet it always flew successfully when the guys were up on the moon. Why is it that no one seems to think it's important to go back to the moon and establish some kind of human base of operations? From the moon, we could much more easily travel back into space on longer missions. There would be much less gravity to deal with, and it's very logical to establish a base on the moon as kind of a stepping stone. But Elon Musk, who's making the plans for the trip to Mars, doesn't want to go to the moon. Buzz Aldrin doesn't seem to think we should go to the moon. There are very valuable things on the moon like helium-3. It is thought that helium-3 could be much safer as nuclear energy in a fusion reactor, since it's not radioactive and it would not produce any dangerous waste products. Why are we not mining helium-3 on the moon? And this next one is really strange, and I'm not sure exactly what to think of this, and I pulled this off of a couple websites. Why did the Chinese recently not find any evidence of the original landings by NASA on the moon? Well, let me continue here. Did you know that the Chinese lunar rover found no evidence of the American moon landings? The top officials in the Chinese space program have expressed their feelings that the American moon landings were a complete hoax, reports the Beijing Daily Express. This was an article found on a website called worldnewsdailyreport.com. I don't know how trustworthy that website is. It was also found on another website, beforeitsnews.com. I don't know how trustworthy that website is either. The officials of the Chinese space program are now wondering if the moon landings were a hoax. 200 Chinese officials have signed a petition saying that they think the American moon landings, in fact, might be a hoax. A dozen top Russian engineers have also signed a petition now claiming that the moon landings were, in fact, a hoax. So before I play any clips, I'm going to give Solaris and Anthea a chance to chime in if they so desire. You guys have anything to comment on?
Well, only thing I would say is, did the Chinese go to the area where the Americans were supposedly landed? What was it, Sea of Tranquility?
That was my understanding. I have probably more research to do. I have a link, and it'll explain some of this stuff on the clip, hopefully.
Okay.
So, what do you think, Solaris?
Well, I think that, where I come from, I believe that there's a lot of black technology, which, of course, what you're hearing is mostly the mainstream stuff. It's my impression that there has been, and then people have talked about the breakaway society. I think that there is a breakaway society, and that there are certain people and species that are already gone. In other words, there's probably no reason for them to have everybody step up to the level of their black technology right now. So they don't want anybody else going to the moon because they've already done what they needed to do, and they're way beyond us. They're almost like aliens at this point in the continuum, in my opinion. So this is my take on it, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, because and I know, and we all know that they've been working on covert technologies and black technologies, which go far beyond what you're being exposed to with the NASA and all this other stuff that they're feeding people, with the disinformation and all that.
So go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead.
So anyone who has asked NASA, their explanation is, we've done already what we need to do there. We don't need to send men there. Is that the explanation they're giving?
That's what I keep hearing.
And didn't we get a warning not to come back? Don't dare come back.
I've heard rumors of that sort, indeed.
I don't see. I can't say I blame anything for telling them to not come back.
Okay, you guys help me out here because I'm gonna have to do some switching around in order to play these clips, and it's possible that I may do something wrong. And if you can't hear me for an extended period of time, please someone kind of step up. So I'm going to play our first clip about the Chinese lunar rover.
Chinese lunar rover finds no evidence of American moon landings. This is an article on Before It's News, December 15th, entitled, "Wonder why the American media didn't report on this one. Chinese lunar rover finds no evidence of American moon landings." And it describes how the top officials of the Chinese space program have expressed their wonder at the American moon landings wondering if they were a complete hoax. This is reported on the Beijing Daily Express, that 200 high-ranking officials from the Chinese space program signed a petition asking explanations from the American government and the release of classified NASA information concerning the American moon landings that would provide facts, evidence, and prove to the world that the moon landings did take place and were not an elaborately orchestrated hoax to fool the world about America's space program capabilities. I suppose it also has to do with the recent revelation concerning Stanley Kubrick's explanation of how he filmed the whole thing to make it seem a reality. The allegations of the Chinese have come up through recent analysis of pictures taken from the Chinese moon rover that allegedly found no traces of the American moon landings existing on the moon. In addition to this, the famous Russian nuclear engineer Yuri Ignayevich Mukhin also signed the petition, as well as a dozen other top Russian engineers, claiming the Russian government had always been aware of the situation since the early 1970s. So I'll leave a link below for you for this. There's also embedded videos in that you may enjoy.
Okay, that was the first clip. I thought that was pretty interesting.
All recorded.
The next clip is going to be about the 14,000 reels of telemetry data that's missing. And if you guys want to chime in, just jump right in at any point. To me, this next clip is also extremely interesting. So let me cue this up. And
On these telemetry tapes. So where is this hard evidence?
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence. And as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
Could this be true? Mankind's first interplanetary exploration and the original science data is missing?
11, this is Houston, radio check, over.
If it's anywhere, it should be here at NASA's Goddard Space Center in Maryland, home to the National Space Science Data Archives.
This film you're making now, what is it?
This is a film trying to prove that Apollo 11 happened.
Does it have a name? I mean, do you have a name for it yet, or
You're calling it Did We Go?
Did we go? Okay, okay.
Doesn't have it either. The Smithsonian doesn't have it. Johnson doesn't have it.
Right. We've been unable to track it down. I mean, we don't know where this telemetry data ended up, and we don't know what path it may have taken. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can't really give you much of a clue as to where this data ended up and whether it still exists or not.
strange but true, I guess. Solaris, any comments, thoughts?
Well, I think it's all very interesting. And the one thing that really comes to mind when they were talking about there's no evidence of anything on the moon, that was China, though. You have to consider the source.
Right.
And do you remember the year they went and they sent something up there to destroy, impact? Okay, so what year was that? I can't remember now.
Oh, that wasn't long ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. So that always reminded me, I always thought, what are they doing, a demolition up there? What came to mind was a demolition. And I never understood what the purpose was behind that. What were they destroying?
They're probably destroying. Probably destroying an alien artifact up there.
There's something.
It's technology or something there.
Well, that's my impression, because I really thought that it's not coincidence. I think that was a demolition. That's my take on that whole situation. So then I'm wondering, well, what did they demolish? And who knows? Who knows what they destroyed on that level?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Because they allegedly said it was they were going to explode this particular area for the search for water, but wasn't India sent something up just maybe a few years earlier that confirmed there was some trace of water there? So it's like, why did we have to do that? That explosion.
Yeah.
And it was on the south bottom part of the moon too.
Yeah, the only time we can get back to moon is to blow something up. Figure that out.
Destroy the evidence.
And
Yeah, they're notorious for that. They're insidious. What we have to realize is that you all know this, and the listeners are very savvy, that they're basically doing things behind the scenes and not telling anybody the truth. So once we understand that they're liars, which we do, we can't really take anything that's being distributed on mainstream.
Yeah, NASA is just for public consumption, and there probably is a secret space program.
Anthea, you could be a little bit louder. I don't know if you could adjust anything or not.
Oh, am I a little louder now?
Yeah, it's a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just that I'm a big mouth.
No. Stuart Swerdlow has said something about our secret space program or something to that effect, hasn't he?
Yes.
And he's always talking about supposedly some things in the Kuiper Belt that are getting closer and closer.
Yes. He talks about there's already a base, an establishment on Mars underground. He says that it already exists, and there's supposed to be a wormhole from Alice Springs in Australia right up to Mars. And the Kuiper Belt has been a big curiosity.
Well, isn't there supposed to be some strange crafts in the Kuiper?
There's strange crafts, and with Pluto, he surmises, or maybe he got this information from being at the Montauk Project, that Pluto is actually a spaceship.
Really? That's bizarre.
Yeah, because it suddenly appeared in 1933, supposedly.
That's too bizarre. But it also has blue skies and water.
Mm-hmm. And that the moon is probably also a craft.
Well, now we're going to get into the whole reptilian thing there, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to get Stuart back on the show, and I've managed to chat with him a few times. Just message him on Skype, but that's about it. I don't know. I can't seem to quite hook up with him as far as the show, but he's always got some very interesting ideas, and he's been through a lot. We're a little off the topic, but he has been one of the people that have been behind the scenes, as Solaris keeps bringing up the point that there's stuff going on behind the scenes that are probably very real, and what we're seeing is kind of a stage show or something. Now, what are your thoughts, Solaris, on the Mars mission? Do you think that might be real?
I think it's all just a placebo to some degree. I believe we've already have facilities and operations over there, and we've had them for some time. That's my take on it. And people, and honestly, the airbrushing and all the pictures that people see, I'm not even trusting any of the images at all that people are being subjected to. I think that's all BS at this point in the continuum. I know I sound kind of jaded, but it's just that I know so much about what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, I'm very clear that there's so much deception happening that how can we trust anything anymore? I mean, they blatantly lie to your faces. And honestly, it's almost like it's really sad because we had discussed this last night on my show, actually, that we're convinced that there is a group that has actually really, really broken away the very, you can call them elite beyond the word, but they're not really elite. They're just super wealthy, eccentric people who have had the funds and the black technology access to literally go. And I think that's why on a lot of levels, this is like a weird game they're playing out here on this illusion of a planet, because they don't care. They're the people that needed to be gone are gone already. They're already off planet. So they don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, we're all here as suckers. And this is what I'm seeing. And I know it sounds tacky, but honestly, I know this is the case, you guys, because they're reckless here and they don't care anymore. It's almost like it reminds me of that movie Elysium a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the direction we're heading for. I see worldwide communism. That's what I see.
I do too. It's really creepy. It's like an alternate reality from hell. And honestly, the people that are breaking away are not qualified to be off planet. They're actually they're the thieves. They're the ones that really just ripped everybody off and had access to the covert technology, reverse engineered, technologies. But they really don't deserve to be off planet. It's actually, there are many good people here who really deserve to be ascending and moving on. And unfortunately, they're trying to control and manipulate everybody, shut us down, switch us off, and keep us in this collective of hostility and violence. And you can see it every day. So that's all by design, obviously.
Well, what also makes me really concerned is this immigration from Syria going into Sweden and Germany. I think that's going to have devastating effects.
But that's all by design. It's some people think it's white genocide.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it is. I do. I think it's almost like a payback. You know what I noticed? A transfer of power. It's almost like what the Germans did with the covert technology and the black technologies departments way back when they were in charge, and they've been in charge for a long time, and then they decided that they're breaking away, and now we have a transfer of power. What's happening? This is the way I'm profiling it anyway. And now we have this other group that's coming in to do an eradication of whatever's left of the starseed or the white people. I'm telling you, I think that's what they're up to.
Yeah,
So
they want to turn us all into hybrids, a mixed race, because they encourage interracial marriage. So they want to make us all one monocolor, and only the elite will be the white people.
It's really weird. Well, we're already, I mean, what are they going to do now? But I do know they are trying to reverse engineer a lot of people. And also, what I see is that transhumanism program going full speed ahead and dumbing people down to the level of where they can just literally, they're expendable, but they can be cloned. So all they need is the shell of the body, and then just start regenerating them and enslave them to some degree. I think it's a downward spiral. I really do.
That's government schools for you.
Yeah, totally.
You take away culture, because when you have multiculturalism, you have so many different cultures in school, there's always going to be something that's going to be offended. You read the stories that go through like the Facebook timeline, and people post things, and one group is offended by this and offended. So they take all of that out, and it could be removed culture, and what are we going to be learning?
Exactly. It's like Planet of the Apes. Honestly, I see it like, what was that movie, Thunderdome? I swear it's like that.
Yeah.
It's getting nasty. I mean, people don't, I can profile this. This is why. If this timeline doesn't change, we're going down. That's all there is to it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I personally think that when you mix two races like that, it actually damages the genetics of both races. And let me explain why. Because I think over centuries, over thousands of years, people in certain areas, their bodies make genetic changes to adapt to that environment. If they're in a warmer environment, their skin will get darker, their hair will change, their bodies will change. If they're in a cooler environment, they'll grow different kinds of hair, their skin will change, their facial features will change. So what we're doing is wiping out all that genetic adjustment.
If that's how the many different races occurred on the planet, or else it could be alien interference, right?
I think it's both. I really do. But I think the mass mixing, is going to degrade the genetics of both, because we do evolve to a certain degree to the environment that we're surrounded in. But I do agree with you. I think that there is an extraterrestrial element to bringing in all of these multiple races. But I think it's going to be much more devastating than we realize. I think it does more than just wipe out a specific country, which is, I think, what they're trying to do. They're really trying to undermine Germany and Sweden.
Well,
and they're taking away culture. That's it. The
Sure.
history of the celestial heritage. Your DNA is extraterrestrial, whether you like it or not. I mean, it's not from here. It's part of the cosmos, and that makes us extraterrestrial, bottom line. Science 101. Oh, go ahead, Anthea.
Oh, I've lost my train of thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This conversation's moving really quick.
Well, there is biodiversity. There are different, like the far left, the liberals say, oh no, there's only one race, the human race.
Oh yeah, right.
But actually, there is a difference between the different races. Your doctor has to know that, because when I went in like last summer and I had that kidney stone, blah, blah, and I'm looking at my medical papers, they indicated what race I was in, and they said, if you're this race, you -10, if you're that race, you +10. In other words, me being Caucasian had to have certain tests done. If I was another race, they have to change the tests, and that's very important, so you get the right diagnosis. So even on that level, there is a biodiversity.
Right. It's also a species war too. I mean, you take it outside the suit and really look at the DNA. It's really about species, and that gets into the extraterrestrial seed, which is our DNA activated through frequency, which we are star seed. So when you get to the complexity, and they know this, by the way, in these covert divisions, because they've been working on this for a long time with genome projects, they understand very clearly that's going on. So it's a species war, Mark. We're dealing with species that are in conflict, and I think it has a lot to do with celestial heritage, what we are as galactic beings and galactic citizens, and how it's conflicting here on the timeline.
Well, it's very interesting how we started at the moon landings and we've progressed to these deeper ideas behind the whole. It's like we're watching a movie, or there's a facade here, like an old Western facade town, and there's something going on behind it, and we're not exactly sure what, but we can sure tell that what we're seeing is just a dog and pony show.
You know, it reminds me of Blazing Saddles. Remember, with the fake scenery and it all falls down when they come into town? It's a fake town. That's how I feel right now on the timeline. I'm like, this is all a joke. It's all a construct, Mark.
To me, and boy, now we're really getting off topic. Even the presidential race seems like just a joke. I mean, I think the whole process
I think we're really fighting for survival here.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I should say what candidate I like, but this country needs a huge cultural change.
Yes.
Not a political change, a cultural change. I think one of the reasons Donald Trump is so popular is you got to get rid of this political correctness, because once your freedom of speech, the things you want to, you got to be so careful. I mean, you can actually lose your job if you say the wrong thing, blah blah blah. So it's stifled. So if you can't really speak your mind, if you can't really talk, then you can't really have true debates and work things out. So you got to get rid of this political correctness. And
I agree, and I like Trump. Hey, I'm voting for Trump. Hopefully he likes it. They're trying to sabotage the hell out of him. So
yeah,
I like Trump.
Okay,
yeah, he says it like it is.
That makes three of us. So we'll
hey.
and I think that's what it will be a cultural change, even if he doesn't do anything in the White House other than build that wall or help with the trades. That TPP. Oh my God. Even if that's all he ever does, it's going to open channels for maybe real communication about things. Because he brought up subjects nobody else would dare to bring up.
That's right.
And
you're right.
For that, I have to give him kudos.
This country's done if he doesn't get elected, right? I mean, you guys realize that, right? I don't think most of these weirdo liberals do. They're in la la land. I'm telling you, they don't get it. But I'm telling you point blank, if anybody else gets into office besides him, it's over. Game's over.
You get these protesters at his rally waving the communist flag.
What the hell's wrong with them? Talk about brainwashed. Talk about, these are the sleepers. These are the ones that have been slept all along, drinking the Kool-Aid, living the lie, watching the mainstream media, sitting there with no functioning neurons, and all of a sudden they're getting triggered, and either they're being paid to protest like that, or they're just acting up out of stupidity and ignorance. It's blowing me away. I mean, and you notice that the smart people, the people that have a foundation in consciousness, are actually supportive of Trump.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, because the people that I talk to who support Trump are very intelligent. They're very, savvy when it comes to what's going on.
And the way the liberal handle it, they can't give a good argument. They can't give you facts. They can't give you facts. They can't give you reason, which is how you have an argument. They just call you names. They'll call you a racist. They'll call you a hater. I said, well, prove it to me. Prove that he has said anything hateful.
They change it. They're sociopaths. They like to turn it back on the person that's telling the truth. I can't stand people like that. That's a program too, by the way. That's mind control at 101. What they're doing.
You can't pay me enough to wave a communist flag.
It's amazing to me. They're like rah socialism, rah communism. And then I just saw an article. They said that you can't have the American flag with you when you're taking a tour in the White House. What?
Yeah.
I mean, what? What country is this?
Did you hear Obama's talk down in Cuba? Some of the excerpts from what he was saying.
No, I can't stand him. I didn't want to hear him, but I'm sure he was
praising communism.
That's fine. If he likes it, ship his ass over there, but get him out of D.C.
Yeah, but don't do it to this country.
That's what I mean. It's like, whatever he likes, cool, bud, but get out of my country, because you don't support American freedom or our country or our flag, and you don't belong here. That's what I have to say about people in D.C. and the people in Congress. If you don't love our country like we do, get the hell out.
And you got Fidel Castro endorsing Bernie Sanders. I have friends who I thought were very intelligent and educated who are Bernie Sanders
Boynie Sanders. He's like a grumpy old man. Oh, don't get me started with him. Oh, I think your guest is here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just dragged in Bart's.
Do you want me to drop off now, Mark?
And no, you guys can stay. Please stay for the first hour if you like.
Okay.
Bart, let me introduce you to my two co-hosts, Solaris Blue Raven and Anthea Appel. We are somehow we started on the moon landings and we've digressed heavily into politics and the presidential race. Did you have anything political that you might want to comment on, or just the general state of the country and things like that?
Well, the moon landings were political. That's why they were done. The Nixon administration said the number one threat to the country wasn't Russia, wasn't China. It was domestic protests of the Vietnam War. And what better way to counter that than to give them a pep rally? I mean, if you think about the moon landing conspiracy, unlike JFK or 9/11, whoever killed JFK, whether it was the Soviets, the Cubans, or Nixon, he's still dead. And whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are still dead. But this is a positive conspiracy, and people don't want to give it up. It's like telling them their home team, even though no one's actually from their home state, which won the Super Bowl, that they cheated to win. People don't want to hear it. This positive conspiracy, people have a hard time giving up. It was very political in nature. It was something to give us to cheer about, and the only way they could guarantee success was to fake it.
You know, I've heard that NASA's losing all this data associated to the moon landings, and that's one of the things I brought up before he came on, that they've lost some 14,000 reels of telemetry data. The plans for the LEM have been lost by Grumman. The lunar rover plans have been lost by Boeing. I think they can't find the plans for the Saturn V. And I interviewed a guy named Dr. Ken Johnston, who worked for NASA, who told me that he was ordered to destroy a whole bunch of films and photographs that he had associated to the moon landings. And I think he did destroy everything but like one group. So it's just amazing that why is NASA telling its employees to destroy all of this evidence?
Well, there's only one reason, and that's if it were fake. If it were real, they would want all of that preserved. I mean, they have copies of the Old Testament that are 2,500 years old. We have copies of the Constitution that are 250 years old. So to say that we can't keep up with something that's 47 years old seems a little bit absurd. Obviously, if you made this incredible machine that, went to the moon and landed on the moon on the very first attempt, you would definitely want to keep all of that investment and all the billions of dollars and man hours to keep that going again. The fact is that a scientist and electrician could put it together and say, well, wait a minute, you're saying you're sitting in 250 degrees Fahrenheit and you have basically a bank of 12 car batteries, and you're saying that can power air conditioning for 3 days? And you realize that doesn't add up. The same thing with the fuel. Von Braun originally said that to go to the moon, you would need 3 rockets, each taller than the Empire State Building, each weighing 10 times the amount of the Queen Mary. Then when Kennedy set the goal to go to the moon, he recanted on his math by 27,000%.
Wow.
Now, so that proves that even the rocket could not leave Earth orbit. It did not have enough fuel to do so. The LEM could not have landed. The LEM could not have protected you from micrometeorites. Von Braun in the 1950s and early 60s, he said as soon as you landed on the moon, you'd have to go into a cave to protect yourself from micrometeorites. He said there was a 50% chance every 24 hours of a catastrophic failure because of micrometeorites. Now, I don't know how many tiny, meteors hit the Earth every day, but it's probably in the tens of thousands. So you can imagine these little particles, even as small as a grain of sand, are constantly hitting the moon. If one were to go through a spacesuit or a spacecraft, it would cause catastrophic decompression and everyone would die.
So what do you think about von Braun? Do you think he was an evil Nazi, a good man? What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that he used slave labor during World War II to construct his V rockets that he just kind of randomly launched at London. I mean, they weren't accurate enough to hit military targets, but they could hit somewhere within the city. So he was just randomly killing people, just like ISIS is doing today. I'd say that's probably an evil person. In fact, someone from the State Department said on camera, you could probably find this on YouTube somewhere, that had he lived 2 or 3 years longer, the State Department was going to prosecute him as a war criminal.
No kidding.
So, von Braun, known for gassing people, known for blowing up women and children in London at random. This is the guy, who obviously is in charge of the moon program. And again, the number one argument that people say, well, they couldn't have possibly faked it with hundreds of thousands of people involved in it. Well, duh, do you really think the CIA is stupid enough to tell the person making the glove or the door or the boot handle? Do you really think they're going to say, hey, by the way, the moon missions are fake, don't tell anybody? That's like saying that a bank teller and a CEO of the bank have the same inside information about the financials of the corporation. That's simply ridiculous. And yet, this is the number one argument that people against the fact that the moon landings are fake say, well, you couldn't fool that many people, or that many people couldn't keep a secret, and they're right. That's why they didn't tell them. I mean, you only had 3 people on the rocket. I mean, in World War II, you had a billion witnesses witnessing the Holocaust and, and the murder of people because of their, religious or racial background. But here we have only 3 people. And for the first time in world history, there's absolutely no independent press coverage. The TV picture is completely controlled by the government. And that's what we uncovered in the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which you can see at BartSibrel.com. And you can see that they had this 3rd track of audio that they accidentally left on this portion of the tape we uncovered. And when NASA asked them a question, there was a deliberate 4-second delay to give the impression that they're halfway to the moon, when in fact they were in Earth orbit the entire 8 days. And after 4 seconds has elapsed, you hear a third party say, talk. And then Neil Armstrong starts speaking to create the effect of an increased radio delay, as if they were further from the Earth than they really were. All this is on the tape. We have a reel of them faking a shot right in front of your eyes over and over and over again. There's absolutely no question that the moon missions were fake. And now the government, if they admit this, what else are they going to be forced to admit? It's just really sad that this happened, but it did. And it amazes me that some people will just not face facts. I used to be the biggest fan. I had pictures on my wall for 10 years or more of the Apollo 11 photographs. I thought it was the greatest thing. Fortunately, the idea of it being fraudulent came to me when I was open-minded. I started looking at the pictures, and sure enough, they didn't add up. I ended up becoming a filmmaker whose job is to make fake scenes look real. I even had a colleague of mine more experienced than myself look at one of my films and say, Bart, that was a beautiful way you used the sunset out the window. I said, well, that was really an electrical light at the window. So I can tell if something is lit with sunlight or electrical light. And 100% certain the pictures allegedly taken on the moon were shot in a television studio with electrical light and not sunlight. That means it didn't happen. And I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, and 50 years later, in 1977, no country is able to fly across the Atlantic in an airplane. That just is illogical.
I know.
So if it were so easy to go to the moon in the 1960s, there would be bases there by now.
Yeah.
Everybody would be there by now. And they can't even say they can return until 70 years later. That's the earliest they say they can do it. Now, if I said, hey, Mark, I just did cold fusion. You won't believe it. It's incredible. And you say, hey, show me. And I say, well, come back in 70 years.
Well, don't they have helium-3 on the moon that we could use for cold fusion?
I have no idea what's up there. They don't really care why you believe the moon landings are real, whether, this lie that they're communing with aliens or there are alien artifacts there. All that stuff is made up just to deceive the UFO community. The UFO community are intelligent people. They look at the pictures, they say they're fake, and they're like, oh, we're going to lose this large group of intellectuals. What do? We better say that there's some fake, moon crews that secretly are communing with aliens on the moon. That's just simply not the case. They can't go to the moon because they don't have a rocket big enough and because of lethal radiation. It's that simple. NASA admitted that. If you go to Sibrel.com and then link on Conspiracy Corner, go down to the article about the Orion project, a guy from NASA in his 20s admitted on camera that the technology does not yet exist for crews to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belt. Now, wait a minute. Then how did they do it so successfully 47 years ago? Oops. It's just totally absurd.
Yeah, we've lost 14 people in the space shuttle crashes that only go up 400 miles, and yet 6 different times. We took men some 200,000 miles out into space and didn't lose a single astronaut.
Well, yeah, I mean the moon missions are 1,000 times farther than the space shuttle goes.
Gee.
I mean, that's pretty remarkable, isn't it? If you had a globe of the Earth, a 1-foot globe like in the classroom, the space shuttle goes 1/2 an inch above the globe, about 200 miles. So pick, a place 200 miles from wherever you are away from you in Ohio, and just make that vertical. That's as high as they can go. And yet they're saying with 1960s technology, I can go to Walmart and I can buy a $10 watch that has more computing power than NASA had at the time they went to the moon. And yet they can go 1,000 times farther than they can today with 1960s technology. That is completely illogical. How can these people who constantly defend them naively believe we went to the moon in the 60s when it cannot be done today? It is so obvious they did not go.
When I was a kid, one thing I remember, I was about 8 years old, I think, at the time. And, I was there, and I can remember my parents, and we were watching it all on the TV. And the one thing that it freaked me out, I started like yelling a little bit as a kid when the flag started waving in the wind. And I remember I got in bad trouble for saying that. And I always wondered about that. Why were my parents angry at me for saying that?
That's a very interesting thing, the emotional component here, Mark, because there's a saying, it says this: the likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity to which others are trying to prove him wrong. I get emails from people saying that they wish they could watch me and my family burn alive.
Really?
All simply for saying they faked the moon landing. That's it. Simply for saying they faked the moon landing. That's like me telling you, hey, Mark, he won that game. He didn't have 4 aces. He was bluffing. Ooh, big whoop. You know what I mean?
Right.
Who cares? But because I'm getting such hate mail, that indicates that this is something out of the ordinary. It has become a god to people. If you listen to recordings during the launch, you can hear them say, my God. And that's what Apollo is. It's a god. Apollo, if you trace all the names of Lucifer, it goes back to Lucifer, which is the great deceiver, the liar. And Mark Twain said something pretty profound. He said, it is easier to fool people than to convince people that they have been fooled.
Have you done any research on the chevron symbol that appears in a lot of these stickers and things for all the space programs all over the world? It's almost like the tongue of a serpent or something, it looks like. Have you done any research on that?
I have a friend who's constantly sending me Illuminati symbolism, the number 33 in advertising, the number 13 in advertising. I have no doubt this is associated with that. From what I understand, every single astronaut, except maybe one, the teacher or something who went up there, is a 33-degree Mason. It's all about, secrecy. I'm sure you're familiar with Kennedy's speech about 6 weeks before he died about how, secrets are overtaking our government. I mean, there are occasions, obviously, when you want to keep technology a secret from the enemy, or acts of, covert war and things like that, you want to keep a secret. But most of the time, all of this stuff that the government keeps secret is simply to hide their crimes. There was something called the quiz show scandal in the 1950s, and Time magazine had on the cover with the headline, "The Smartest Man in America." And it was this guy who won, the $64,000 question or whatever quiz show it was.
Mm-hmm.
It came out a few months later. He was given the answers in advance.
Weird.
Because he was so popular. You see, he was, the love child, the all-American boy, whatever, and that's who they wanted to win. And so they gave him the answers. The whole thing was rigged. So they actually had congressional investigations into this. And because of this, Mark, maybe you could help me find this. They wrote a law. Congress wrote a law which said you cannot deceive people through television. And
right.
Right. And then now you have this government who wrote the law not obeying their own laws, right? The only reason people believe the moon landings are real is because they saw this black and white picture and the emotional impression that they had of cheering and, wishing them well or whatever. And to be quite honest, if we had a good government and if Nixon was a good guy, you have no reason to question it. But they took advantage of that. They really didn't fake the moon landings with superior pictures and superior, fake telemetry and all that stuff. They really successfully faked it because of the emotional component of people wanting to believe it. You see, you want to believe it. America's great. We're better than the Soviets. We're technologically great. So if you're a teacher, if you're, in aerospace, if you're a professor, anything associated with the intellectual pursuit or business, it's kind of like we went to the moon. It's like your friend saying, we won the Super Bowl. Oh, okay. Were any of the guys, from the Tennessee Titans from Tennessee? Well, not actually. Okay. Were you on the field? You said we won. Well, I wasn't on the field. Okay. Were you in the stadium? Well, no, not actually. But we won, and you try to take that away from somebody, and they get really, really mad.
Solaris and Thea, please chime in if you have any questions or comments. Nothing?
Oh, hi. No, hi. I was muted there. I just want to say it's a pleasure to meet you, Bart. You're awesome. Listening, and I'm just enjoying this conversation. No, I totally agree. It's nice to see this. What really bothers me is that there's so much deception going on, and it seems to me like people have been literally brainwashed and conditioned and entrained to believe this stuff to a point where they'll never snap out of it. I'm sorry you're getting the hate mail, but isn't that something that people can't handle a normal debate or conversation without getting just completely flipping out?
Yeah, but the fact that they're flipping out to me is proof that it's a lie. Because if it were just a difference of opinion, oh, the Republicans are better, no, the Democrats are better, it's one of those things. But the fact that it's vicious, violent, foaming at the mouth hatred for simply saying the government lied about something tells you that this event, there's something not right about it. Now, Carl Sagan, from what I understood, he began to pick up on the fact before his death that the moon landings were fake. And he said this: one of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, especially to ourselves, that we've been tricked. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back.
Well said.
And yeah, and we believe that he was specifically talking about the moon landings. He figured out, that technology does not go backwards. That, well, if they went to the moon in the 60s, why are we, just orbiting the Earth now? It doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, well, in 1927 they drove a car from New York to Los Angeles, and now, 47 years later, well, they can't even drive it from New York to New Jersey. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
It's crazy, I tell you. I think the actual hoax is more interesting sometimes than if we did actually go.
Yeah, that's my motivation factor for putting up with all this that I have to go through to make this movie. Let's say they have two possibilities. Okay, one possibility is they had the technology in the 60s to travel, which back to the globe, instead of being a half an inch above the globe, would be 30 globes away. And they planted a flag and they landed and they successfully came back. Okay, so that's one possible historic scenario. The other is what actually happened, which is that they bit off more than they could chew. They refused to admit it. They embezzled billions of dollars. They murdered people to keep it a secret. They brainwashed college students, college professors, the scientific aerospace community, all because of a lack of humility to admit that they couldn't do something they'd set out to do. So, which of the events, if true, would be more significant historically? You see, the fact that they couldn't go and lied about it, covered it up, lied to this day, that is actually more profound of an event historically than if they had actually gone. Do you see that?
Well,
So what we have is one of the greatest events in human history is the faking of the moon landing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet no one knows about it, or virtually no one knows about it. And that's just pretty sad. We can't learn from it. We can't go forward. We're going to be stuck historically, emotionally in this immature state until the truth comes out about that.
It's very interesting to think about. Not only was the moon landing faked, but how many other public myths are out there right now? The Kennedy assassination, 9/11. the Vietnam War.
Well, the whole Vietnam War, you know about the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Sure.
And I think that was in 1964 or 5 in Johnson's administration. The CIA and McNamara, he admitted, like 5, 10 years ago in front of Congress, he says we staged the whole thing, the whole Vietnam War. 1 million Vietnamese lives and 50, 60,000 American lives were all lost because of a war that they instigated through a theatrical staging of a fake attack by the North Vietnamese on the United States. They admitted that. And then I don't know if you know about this young guy named Luke. I think it's Rudofsky of We Are Change. He's kind of like doing Astronauts Gone Wild about anything and everything all around the world. He tracked down Defense Secretary Rumsfeld in New York. Okay, and he went up there and he said, "What's your opinion of Building 7?" And the guy said, "I don't know anything about that. What is Building 7?"
Did he really say that?
Now wait a minute. The guy was defense secretary, I believe, at the time of 9/11. So you have to know about Building 7, the third building that collapsed because of an alleged fire. And he said on camera, "I don't know anything about it." Well, obviously, he had to know something about it. So the fact that he said that he didn't proves that it's a significant piece of evidence that 9/11 was an inside job. Otherwise, he would have said, "Yeah, that was kind of strange. I've never seen a fire like that burn like that up before, But by denying that he knew anything about it, which is completely impossible, he's saying that this is key evidence to prove that it was an inside job. I mean, imagine if there were 2,000 aerospace people who signed a petition saying the moon landings were fake. That'd be a pretty big deal. I mean, 2,000 architects have risked their reputations and their income for their families by saying a steel-framed building has never collapsed in 150 years of them being around because of a fire. Not a single time. It's impossible for it to happen. And yet people still do nothing about it. It's pretty amazing.
Bart, in 2 minutes, we'll probably go to the break. The music will kick on. It'll be about 5 minutes long, so you can take a break and if you need to. So it'll be a while. I want to get back probably after the break and talk a little bit about what you brought up about the Vietnam War. What was the name of the Secretary of Defense that admitted that it was all a hoax? Pretty much.
I think it was McNamara.
Yeah, McNamara. I mean, that's stunning. You would think people would be in an outrage over that, but they're not.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's kind of bizarre. I remember watching a real news story, but it was on the Daily Show, but it was a true fact. It's not that they do fake news, it's they make fun of the news. And it was the fact that the United States had sent over to Iraq, I think it was $5 billion or $4.5 billion in cash. It was 200 tons of $100 bills, and $1.5 billion of it got accidentally misplaced.
$1.5 billion got lost?
That's right. Now, you remember how it was day 300 of the Iranian hostage and day all the way up to day 444? Well, why wouldn't it be? I mean, that's the greatest theft in the history of the world beyond in the second place is so far back. Why wasn't it day 2 of the missing $1.5 billion? Day 20 of the $1.5 billion? Year 3 of the missing $1.5 billion? Why was the Daily Show the one reporting these facts and not NBC News?
Well, didn't somebody say, maybe it was Rumsfeld, that they lost like $1 trillion somewhere?
He said that on September 10th, 2001. They could not find $1 trillion, and they recently said the very same thing. They've lost another $1 trillion since then that they can't account for. And no one does anything about it. It's like everyone in America is in a state of hypnotism.
Yes.
They watch 5 hours of TV a day, which comes to 2.5 work weeks a month.
Oh my
I mean, you work 40 hours a week, right? So it comes to 2.5 work weeks a month of watching television. It just boggles the mind. When do you have time if you're doing that and a job and have kids and want to relax every now and then and mow the lawn? When do you have a time to protest anything?
Well, it's really interesting. I think this electronic media is very much more dangerous than we realize. And people should not be watching that much TV. They should not be playing video games that much. They should not be even watching YouTube that much. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Where is it when people are living life and enjoying the company of other people? They did a study once of praying mantises, and they did it like in the 1940s. And they said, well, after they mate, the female eats the male. Well, they finally, just like 2 years ago, finally studied them in the wild, and the female does not eat the male. They ate the male because they were confined in aquariums in an unnatural state. And America has slowly become crazy enough where they can't even perceive the truth right in front of them.
All right, folks, we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are listener-supported radio, so please make a donation. Press that PayPal button. My guest this evening is BartSibrel. He is an expert on the moon landings, and he's made some very interesting movies, and he also has his own news show now. Bart, why don't we start out the second hour, and you can tell people about your movies and your show and a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Just go to Sibrel, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com, and you'll see all the links. If you click on the YouTube link, it'll take you to my films about the moon landings, including A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, Astronauts Gone Wild, and Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon? Those are the top three. And then I also have a column I write called Conspiracy Corner. And there's at least 3 articles in there that are archived about the moon landings and how they are fake, and how I wish they would simply just admit it like they did about the Gulf of Tonkin. But I think it's a little bit more complex than that, because it's the greatest lie. They really just lied through their teeth. They held ticker tape parades for these guys. They gave them the Congressional Medal of Honor, you see, and then having to take all of that back. And I think even further, because the relatives of the deceased Apollo 1 crew, who would have been the first crew to walk on the moon, including Betty Grissom and his son Scott Grissom, who I've talked to and interviewed for hours and hours, they know that that fire was set deliberately. So if the truth comes out that the moon landings are fake, I think the number one reason why they don't want the truth to come out is it will show the apparent homicide of the Apollo 1 crew for not cooperating with the fraud that was coming down the pike.
They pumped that capsule full of like 100% oxygen, didn't they?
They did, and under those conditions, steel wool will catch fire.
That's crazy.
It is crazy, and they knew not to do it. The Soviets had done that several times before and burned people up. They knew about it, and they did it anyway. In fact, I think we paid $10,000 for it from one of the widows. It's Roger Chaffee's widow. We bought the Apollo 1 fire report, which they, oddly enough, because they can't officially classify it, right? If you ask, for example, you talked about earlier, where are these schematics of the Saturn V, of the lunar module? They say, well, it's not classified; they're just not available. And the same thing with the Apollo 1 fire. If you go to the Congressional Library and you look up Apollo 1 accident report, it's not there. Well, it is there, but it's not there. For example, if you want a non-published number in the olden days, you have to pay an extra $5 or $10 a month. So I would just list my phone number and a celebrity's name, like Gilligan's Island or Rod Serling or something like that. So what they did is they renamed it to, I think it was 201, and they call it the Apollo 201 accident report. So it's technically there in the library, which they can't technically classify it. They just changed the name so that no one would be able to find it. And they kind of have done this with the Apollo 1 report. If you read the whole thing like I have, you find out that there was a smell of smoke in advance. They forced them to stay there even though they asked to get out of there. And that they were buckled in at the time they removed their bodies from the capsule. Now, the first thing you're going to do if there's a fire is you're going to unbuckle yourself and make your way toward the door. But they were still buckled in. Then there was a dip in power prior to the fire, and the relatives of Gus Grissom, they believe there was some sort of alligator clamp type of thing sucking power off of there that sparked the fire. They believe also that they deliberately released a cyanide capsule in there because they wanted to make sure they were dead, and the fire was really the way of getting rid of all the forensic evidence after they had gassed them. And so all of this information is in there. There's another report called the Barron Report that goes into great length about how they, were so far away from going to the moon, not 2 years, but more like 20 years. And the guy who wrote that report, his car stalled at a train crossing. There were several other astronauts whose cars stalled at train crossing. It's kind of like a fad of the way of the CIA killing people at the time. And you would think if an astronaut can eject and things like this, he can get out of a car on a train crossing. But that was a way of taking people who were already dead by some other means and destroying the forensic evidence as best as they could.
Do you think that they used any drugs or hypnosis on the astronauts?
No. People have suggested that. It's not reliable enough. I think they probably did do something like that with Sirhan and the Robert Kennedy assassination. When you see his handwriting and the guy looks like such a innocent, beautiful, placid person. You'd let him babysit your child. You know what I mean? How that guy could become a killer. He himself doesn't remember the event. He keeps repeating things like that. But in this particular case, they have to lie on television, and they have to lie for years. You cannot really trust that to hypnosis. It's not reliable enough. So they had to be meticulously trained on how to lie. In fact, when I interviewed Eugene Cernan in Astronauts Gone Wild, I could tell because I've been on stage myself about 500 times. I've taught at least 20 workshops on acting and writing and filmmaking. I know acting technique. I've taken acting classes. I've studied it. I've taught it. And I could tell Eugene Cernan on Apollo 17, this guy has had the most training on how to lie. I could tell the acting technique. It's like if you play the violin and a guy holds the violin a certain way, you go like, oh, this, that's a particular technique. And this technique of lying, I could see. I was at his house. He charged $2,000 an hour for an interview, which we paid him in cash. And he had this. Yeah, that's what they all charge. They charge $2,000 an hour for the privilege of being lied to. And then he had this picture in a frame with alleged moon dust on it. I'm like, hey, we'll give you a $10,000 deposit on that painting if we could take and have that moon dust analyzed to prove it's from the moon, and he wouldn't do it. Well, as you may know, about 5 years ago, if you do a search on the internet, fake moon rock in Amsterdam, Neil Armstrong personally gave a moon rock that he allegedly personally picked up off the surface of the moon, gave it to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and it sat there in a hermetically sealed box for 40 years, and some guy, curator, watched a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, got curious, opened it up one night, put it under a microscope, and found out it's a piece of petrified wood. And so you get this obscure little story on the internet. Hey, moon rock proves to be fake, but people don't go, well, wait a minute. If the moon rock is fake, what about the moon missions? And then, CNN will report when the space shuttle gets to 365 miles, which is more than 635 miles away from the beginning of a field of radiation called the Van Allen radiation belt, which the astronauts allegedly went through. They are more than 600 miles away from it, and they can see the radiation with their eyes closed like sparks of fireworks. And CNN reports the following, word for word: the radiation belt surrounding the Earth is more dangerous than previously believed. Well, wait a minute. Previously believed would be the people who were in the middle of it 18 times, allegedly, to lunar orbit and back. So how could people 600 miles away from it know more about it than people who were in the middle of it 18 times? Because they said the space shuttle crew from 600 miles away discovered that it was more dangerous than previously believed, which is when the astronauts went through it, allegedly, which they did not, to the moon and back. So the clue is, it's right there. They're saying that the Apollo astronauts did not go to the moon right there. And then Kelly Smith from NASA in the Orion publicity video says this is a dangerous field of radiation and we must first learn to protect astronauts from it before we send people through this region of space, which means the technology to protect people from the Van Allen radiation belt, which only the Apollo astronauts went through, has yet to be invented. So how come they went through it and didn't get killed? Because according to this newly uncovered document that I recently wrote an article about, you can read it under Conspiracy Corner at Sibrel.com. It says new, discovered document. It says that the amount of radiation from Geiger counters in the 1950 from Van Allen's probe, they are anywhere, I think it's from 1 to 400 times more radiation than a lethal dose. I said in the video before I did the math on it 2 to 10 times, and I did the math again. I'm like, wait, no, it's 100 to 400 times more than a lethal dose. That's how lethal. And people don't realize this. The space shuttle goes up 200 miles, which isn't very far, and 800 miles above that is the beginning of a radiation field that goes from there another 30,000 miles. The only time human beings are said to have gone through this 30,000 mile thick radiation field is going to the moon and back. They'd have to go through it to go to the moon and back. But the footage we uncovered and showcase, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, is them pretending to be halfway to the moon. Now, they're pretending to be halfway to the moon because they're not halfway to the moon. They're still in Earth orbit, which means they cannot leave Earth orbit. And that's exactly the limit that we have today, is people in Earth orbit.
Anthea, any questions, comments?
Just one question. I was wondering about Apollo 1, the astronauts who were killed. You said they were killed deliberately. What did they know that they had to be silenced?
Well, Gus Grissom had done an early Mercury flight, and he was like the third, fourth person into Earth orbit. And when he splashed down, the impact and the ocean triggered what are called explosive bolts on the door. They have a manual way of opening it, and if that doesn't work, they hit a button, and the door literally with explosives will fly out into the ocean so you can get out of it quickly in the event of emergency. Well, when the capsule hit the ocean at some 25 to 30 miles an hour, it triggered the explosive bolts, and so the thing's going to bob underwater 20, 30 feet, and then the explosive bolts go off underwater, the doors open underwater, the thing starts filling with water. The thing starts sinking. This is when Kennedy was president.
Right.
And what happened is at the press conference, it was considered to be, this embarrassing failure. He admitted that he had in his pockets about 6 rolls of nickels from the bank. And the reason is his son was like in the 3rd grade, and he wanted to give these nickels to his son to give out to his classmates to say, hey, this nickel has been in outer space. So he did this, for the children. And when he realized he was sinking to the bottom of the ocean with this extra unnecessary weight in his pockets, he realized that wasn't the smartest idea. And everyone in the press car laughed, and everyone, loved the guy. And then someone asked, were you afraid? And he said, of course I was afraid. And because of that, the whole public was endeared to him, just like the guy in the quiz show scandal. And so they had already made up their mind, this is the guy who's going to be the first man to walk on the moon. Well, it was during the Johnson administration that they realized they could not go. It would be impossible to go. The odds of surviving on the first attempt was like 1 in 10,000. Can you imagine killing people on national TV? Very embarrassing, very discouraging. And so he started preparing his own reports to give to a member of Congress about how they were decades away from going to the moon and not years. And in fact, the FBI or the CIA came to his home. Betty Grissom told me they removed those papers before she was even informed that he was dead. And he was complaining up the chain of command that, this equipment would not work. In fact, the very, minutes before the guy burned alive, they couldn't get a wired intercom to work between two buildings. And he said, "Hey guys, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between two buildings?" And they said, "Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you repeat that?" He said, "Yeah, guys, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between two buildings?" And there's a picture of them, him and his crew, praying over the capsule, which was an insult to NASA. And then there was another occasion a few days before he burned alive where he took a lemon the size of a grapefruit, clipped a coat hanger at the bottom, stuck the lemon in between, turned the hook around, and hung it on the top of the rocket, calling it a lemon in an unauthorized press conference. So the generals were like, "This guy is a boat rocker, and if we ask him to fake the moon landing, he's not going to cooperate." So they burned him alive with two other people to make it look like they weren't singling him out. And that was a great threat to the other astronauts. Now, if you study the behavior of these people before and after, Neil Armstrong, for one, I believe was at one time a man of considerable integrity. And a guy like that, who's a test pilot, when they asked him to fake the moon landings, I suspect he said, "Good luck with that, but I don't want to have anything to do with it." Except after the Apollo 1 fire, he was already selected to take their place and to be the first man to walk on the moon. And if he were to resign, they didn't want the public or the press asking questions about that. So they would not let him resign. Now, the guy flies aircraft that has never before been flown. Extremely dangerous. In fact, a few weeks before they allegedly went to the moon, the lunar module test vehicle, he ejected less than 1 second before it crashed and burned on the ground. So if you threaten a guy's life like that, it probably doesn't mean a whole lot to him. So you have to turn up the heat, and you threaten the life of his wife and his family. And that's why the three astronauts all resigned shortly after they came back, and two of the three of the Apollo 11 crew do not like giving interviews. Michael Collins didn't like to do it, and Neil Armstrong didn't like to do it because it disgusts them that they had to lie about it. Now, there was some point, though, along the way that his soul, as the Bible says, became seared beyond recovery. And on the 25th anniversary of the event, which I believe was 1994, he said tearfully in the White House to a group of high school students coming through that day, "Perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers." Now, back then, as I read people, he had a soul. He regretted what he did. But years later, when I met him, and I met him 3 times, the guy looked like a great white shark with no soul, nobody at home. He didn't care. He had given up.
Wow. That is crazy. And Solaris, do you have any questions?
Well, I just find this very fascinating, this information. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's pretty sad when you see how they get compromised. I tell you what, it's such a shame.
So Neil looked to you like he was like almost a different person?
The look that I got from him and some other astronauts and some people in the CIA who I met personally, the best as I could describe it, they all had this particular look, and it was extremely frightening. And I'm not intimidated easily.
Mm-hmm.
I meet one person every 5 years who intimidates me, but these guys had this look like they would kill you and go home and have a fried chicken dinner and think nothing about it. They had the look, if you've ever seen it in these documentaries, of a great white shark. No soul, nobody at home.
Wow.
They don't care if it's your grandmother who fell overboard or your wife or your child. He's going to eat you. He doesn't care. And that's what these people have turned into, who, gave up and gave in to this. I mean, it's going to cost them their soul. That's why the greatest scripture, in my opinion, in the Bible is, "What good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul. You know, the whole planet and all its wealth isn't worth one human soul. And these people compromised. You know, I mean, it's pretty tempting if you can have a new house and a new car and a new girlfriend and money in the bank and never having to work again. I mean, all that stuff's pretty tempting, and fame and glory and all this stuff. But you got to count the cost that everyone's going to have to face death and judgment day someday. That's the great equalizer, isn't it? Death. And I guess they chose poorly.
Well, maybe they have their diary written somewhere and, stored away someplace to be read after my death or my family's death. You know, everything. I don't think I could live with myself to have that type of lie.
That's
why they generally didn't lie about it. That's why they generally didn't give interviews, so they wouldn't be forced to lie, with the rare exception of Buzz Aldrin, who just seemed to ramble on about it ever since the first press conference. I mean, I show a few seconds of the press conference, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, the one and only unified press conference about it, and they look like they're at the funeral of their mother who just died.
Right.
I mean, you know the footage when you're in the winning locker room of the Super Bowl, you can't wipe a smile off anyone's face, and they look the exact opposite. I'm convinced because of this, footage we found of them faking a shot right in front of your eyes. To me, that's very convincing. It's irrefutable. But other people say, look at their expressions. During their press conference, they look so discouraged, so unhappy because they're lying through their teeth. And it's just amazing that the public puts so much trust in the government, and then, with the TV picture they controlled, photographs they controlled, telemetry which they controlled, they took complete advantage of it.
Wasn't there, I can't think of which astronaut it is, but he was giving a talk and somebody asked him, did you go to the moon? And he kind of flipped out and ran off the stage and became sick.
Yeah, that was Buzz Aldrin. He used to throw up in the early days when they would ask him about these things. Have you heard of that, Bart?
Well, I've met most of the Apollo astronauts personally, and some of that behavior is in the follow-up to A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is called Astronauts Gone Wild, in which one astronaut punches me, one astronaut kicks me, one astronaut threatens to punch me, another one threatens to have me killed by the CIA.
Really?
When we accidentally left a wireless microphone on him in his house, and the person who did the transcript of the interview pointed out, Bart, did you realize he privately threatened to call the CIA and have you killed? And it's like, all this is on tape. And I got to thinking, well, the CIA has to be keeping up with this. They have to be monitoring people's phone calls who are, trying to expose that the moon landings are fake. Why didn't they warn these guys? And I thought about that. Why? I mean, they obviously knew that I was going there and doing an interview. All I told them is I'm doing an interview about the Apollo moon landings. They assumed that I meant that meant that I believed they were real. That was a bad assumption on their part. But I thought afterwards, why didn't they warn them? Why didn't the CIA warn them that I was coming? And I think the new generation of people in the CIA, most of whom are patriotic, wanting to serve their country, are disgusted at what they did. And that was some other administration, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. They're going to let them flounder on their own.
I have this sinking feeling that none of us are going to see anyone get back to the moon in our lifetime.
Well, it can't be done today, so how could it possibly be done with 1960s technology? It's just illogical completely. And they keep putting it off. It's like the balanced budget, next year. And then if you do all these clips of people saying we're going to have a balanced budget next year, it starts in the 70s. They've said it about 200 times, and they keep doing this. We're going to return. They said it in the 70s. We're going to return to moon in the 80s. In the 80s, they said it was going to be in the 90s. In the 90s, they said in the first decade of the 21st century. And now it's another, it's 2030, and then it's only Russia who says they're going to do it in 2030. Not even the Americans. It's like this mirage. The further you go down, it still gets further and further away. It never happens. That's because it can't happen. The South Pole has wind speeds of about 100 miles per hour, and they are almost 100 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Yeah. And yet, under those extreme conditions, there are bases there. You know why? Because it's physically possible. Even though it may be barely physically possible. If it were possible to go to the moon in the 1960s, there would be bases there by now. The fact that there are not bases there, like there are at the South Pole under those conditions, is proof that it cannot be done. Because if it could be done, there would be bases there. If there's not bases there, that means it cannot be done.
So, what do you think about Elon Musk, this billionaire that says they're going to go to Mars? What's this all about? Another hoax?
Not exactly. The guy and the Virgin Atlantic guy, they're trying simply to put things into Earth orbit. And how many they've blown up 5, 6, 7 rockets trying to put simply payloads into Earth orbit. So you can imagine if they're blowing up 80% of the attempts trying to get into Earth orbit 200 miles above the Earth, how could they go to the moon 1,000 times farther with 1960s technology? It doesn't make any sense. It amazes me that these so-called intellectuals cannot see the facts of that. You know, that like I said, Lindbergh claiming he flew across the Atlantic in 1927, and 50 years later, which we have 747s and millions of aircraft saying, no one has been able to repeat that event. Technology does not go backwards. You know, they were thinking so short term at the time they faked it. You know, they're like, well, some other administration will have to deal with it. And it just keeps going on and on and on and on. I don't know. But the good thing, though, Mark, is that from about a year and a half ago, 9 out of 10 emails I got on this subject were hate emails, wishing I was dead and so forth. And as of about a year and a half ago, now 9 out of 10 are positive. I think the tide is turning. I think I heard during the break talking about a paradigm shift. I think was one of the terms your voiceover used. And that's what this moon landing hoax is all about. The world is waking up that the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, it's a joke. Each are pre-selected candidates. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like saying to a slave, would you like to have Master Smith or Master Jones?
Yes.
Okay, so what difference? There's no difference. I mean, I think it was 4 years ago, the Republican Party deliberately scuttled Ron Paul's election, the only guy that polls showed could have beat Obama in the general election. So if it doesn't matter to the Republican Party who wins the election, how can it possibly matter to the voter?
Yeah.
I mean, you have these political leaders who are not faithful to their wives. So how can we expect them to be faithful to a citizen they'll never meet?
Exactly. Yeah, and the Clintons, I just love to talk about the Clintons. They're I mean, that's such an extreme example. Oh, boy. You know, have you heard about this China lunar rover that went up to the moon, supposedly? I don't know how real this information is. It was supposedly the Beijing Daily Press said they sent up this rover. I guess it was a robotic rover. They found no evidence of the American moon landings. Have you heard about this at all?
We can send equipment through the radiation field that starts 1,000 miles and goes 30,000 miles around. Just like you can X-ray a toaster 1,000 times.
Bart, I think you're getting interfered with. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
He was completely. You were completely scrambled then, Bart. That was the.
Okay.
You're totally scrambled.
How about now? Am I okay?
Nope.
This is spooky. To tell you the truth, just a little bit. Why don't you try to speak again?
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, that's better. Go ahead. Yeah. Wow, that was weird. Go ahead.
Well, you can send probes to the moon, just like you can X-ray a toaster 1,000 times, it'll still make toast. But if you X-ray a human being 1,000 times in a day, they're going to have a problem. Now, interestingly, NASA claims that all of the moon landing sites, alleged moon landing sites, are off limits. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
NASA says you would think with all of this argument about how the moon missions are fake, they would welcome probes to come to their area to prove that they really went to the moon in the 60s, but they're doing the exact opposite. They said all of these landing zones are off limits. Now that's pretty silly. And then some people say, well, Bart, NASA's lunar orbiter took, these satellite pictures of what appear to be, footprints or a little shadow of the lunar module. See, that's proof we went. That's like, wait a minute, they just faked pictures of an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon in the 60s. And you're saying, 40 years later, the same people who faked the moon mission are providing this evidence that they're real? That's like asking a criminal for evidence to condemn himself. It's never going to happen. I can't believe scientists really say, well, Bart, this is proof, we went to the moon, because now there are more pictures from NASA who faked the moon mission that show that the moon missions are real. Really? I mean, and there are these little scratches on the lunar satellite pictures that are allegedly footprints or rover tracks or whatever. I'm like, it's so easy to fake a little shadow on a satellite picture. They already faked them full body on the surface, and then with the guy's face right there. So more proof from a criminal that he's innocent isn't proof at all. I can't believe they think it is.
And what do you say about the laser reflectors that are supposedly on the moon?
Well, you can go to Scientific American. There's moontruth.org, I think, is out there. And if you go there, you can see that the government and scientists were bouncing lasers off the moon in the 1950s, off of reflective surfaces off of the moon. It doesn't take a man-made mirror on the moon to get a laser to bounce back off of it. All they had to do is find a reflective surface that does that. They could have chosen all the landing sites that have those reflective surfaces. Additionally, Russia put an unmanned probe on the moon that had a laser reflector. So that's no proof either, you see?
Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of a guy named, I think it's Phil Plait?
Uh-huh.
Okay. What do you think of him? He's like a scientist that comes out and tries to make a really strong argument that we have gone to the moon. Have you talked to him?
I've talked to him several times privately, and he finally admitted to me when I pulled his teeth out that he gets funding from NASA. He finally admitted his paycheck is from NASA. I think it was it Mussolini? And I don't want to call Phil Platt an idiot. He's not an idiot, but there's a term in which some dictator in Russia said, it's great to have useful idiots who really believe, what you tell them and go out and tell other people. They really don't want people lying who know that they're lying. They would rather have people lie who really believe what they're saying is the truth. And it's amazing they get all of these, Boy Scout misdirected patriots to do their dirty work for them because they just, think going to the moon is the greatest thing. It's their God, Science is their God, and the moon missions are their God. They're all fans of Star Trek. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They all, were shown TV shows where you can beam me up and fly around the universe without any radiation problems, without any fuel problems. And somehow they bought into this lie that they could go to the moon. And they have these people arguing for them who I believe sincerely think, we went to the moon, but they're just completely misled. And they're, like they said, they're being useful pawns for people above them who know the truth. They love people to lie for them who really believe what they're saying is true, because then you can't prove that they're lying.
I think Phil's a pretty talented debater, though. What do you think?
Well, not really. I mean, because we have this footage of them faking a shot right in front of your eyes, and there's nothing he has to say about it. And then this other NASA, front company called Spacecraft Films, releases part of the footage that I uncovered to prove that it means nothing. And at the very beginning of it, where the CIA is heard prompting the astronauts to speak after exactly 4 seconds of intended dead air, they removed that part. So if you buy the spacecraft film version of the footage that I uncovered and you hear NASA say, hey, the TV picture looks great, 4 seconds go by, they edited out the CIA saying talk. Now, if that doesn't mean anything, then why did they edit it out?
Have you ever heard the Joe Rogan and Phil Plait debate?
No, I heard about that. I've met Joe, and we had dinner in Los Angeles when I was there once, and he's a great guy. He's a big supporter of the fact that the moon landings are fake. I never heard their debate. I think I heard he did some show about it, but he's a good guy, and I just don't know what to say. I mean, the argument speaks for itself. I mean, again, if they can go to the moon on the very first attempt with 1960s technology, then they should have bases there by now. There has never been a flying machine in the entire history of aviation that ever worked on the very first attempt, not a single time, except the most complicated one, landing on another world. Right. The 747 was designed in the 1960s. It took a year longer to develop an airplane simply to go 5 miles up when airplanes had been around in the millions of them for years and decades. And when they rolled out the 747 fuselage, it could not get off the ground. They went through 162 engines to try to lift that thing off the ground.
My.
Now that is with more technology than they had to go to the moon, and only to go 5 miles up, not a quarter of a million miles away or 500,000 miles round trip. You see, it doesn't add up.
That's true, and I remember hearing about that with the 747. So they couldn't. They said they went to the moon all those times, and they couldn't get the 747 off the ground during that time.
That's right. And so what these, everybody is human. And all these people who will not admit that the moon landings are fake, it's simply their emotional problem. They will not give up the fact. Just like, what did Carl Sagan say? And let me read it again. One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. And he's saying we scientists, we're no longer interested in finding out the truth that bamboozle has captured us. It is simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. And then Mark Twain again said, it is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. It's all about pride. That's why they would not admit that they couldn't go to the moon. It was pride. What's the original sin? Pride. And these people are just prideful. I've talked to a college professor, and I said, if you saw one of the Apollo astronauts go on national TV and admit that they were fake, would you then accept it? And he said, no, I would still think they were real. Yeah. And I would put Phil Plate's name underneath that as well.
Yeah, it would be real interesting. I'm going to try to see if I can contact him. I would love to hear you debate him. That would be a very interesting show. Solaris, do you have any comments, questions?
No, I'm enjoying this listening right now.
Anthea?
Awesome.
No, I'm listening too. It's very good.
It's very interesting. And you know, one of the most interesting people in the whole moon discussion thing is Ralph Renee. Can you talk about him a little bit?
Yeah, I flew him in, and we did an extensive interview with him. Originally, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. It was probably going to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. We have a Bill Casing interview and a Ralph Renee interview. Again, if you go to Sibrel, SIBREL.com, and then click on the YouTube link, you can go down and you can see the complete unedited interview of Bill Casing and Ralph Renee. He is a high IQ person who's a scientist who goes into great detail as to why the moon landings are fake. To me, it's more of the photographic evidence that I uncovered of them faking the photography. In fact, just the slow motion. I mean, when you see them floating around allegedly in 1/6 gravity on the moon, it looks very convincing, to tell you the truth. Even the window shot of them faking being halfway to the moon, unless I had found the unedited version, it was very convincing. It would have fooled me. But if you simply have professional editing equipment and double the speed, you see they're only getting an inch off the ground. And it's so obvious when you double the speed that they're using slow motion. Ralph Renee goes into all this about radiation and the pressurization. For example, in this famous picture of allegedly Aldrin standing on the moon, his arm is bent at 90 degrees and there's wrinkles in his suit. Well, let me ask you this. Are there any wrinkles in a balloon when you blow it up?
No.
Exactly. And the thing is supposed to be pressurized, but it couldn't be, because if it was pressurized, the backpack would be too heavy, which was designed for 1/6 gravity. It would have fallen over backwards. So they removed the cooling unit, and the suit isn't even pressurized. That's why it's wrinkled. You know what I mean? It's right. The evidence is right there in front of you, you know, and so many pictures, you can tell where the real landscape begins and where the fake backdrop begins. I mean, straight across, left to right, different color. They've tried to color correct them. I mean, earlier pictures of that famous picture of Aldrin, the soil is like brown and the background is gray. And then when they keep releasing it, they color corrected it and made them both gray, so you couldn't discern it.
Now, on your Conspiracy Corner website, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? You got two websites?
Well, I have the main website, Sibrel, SIBREL.com, and then from there are buttons for my YouTube channel and for my editorial column at the Sleuth Journal, which is called Conspiracy Corner, where I write about other things other than the moon landing, but basically kind of conspiracy, if you will. People don't realize this, but half of all crimes are conspiracies.
Oh,
Half are done in the heat of the moment without thinking, and then half are plotted out in advance, which is a conspiracy. Conspiracy is throughout the Bible and the Old Testament. Kings are conspired against in advance to be overthrown. Just like the guy in Iceland, the whole Panama Paper things, which is my most recent article, completely contrived. There's no American, criminals. I guess we're all stupid. We're not smart enough in America to be tax dodgers. All the criminals are in foreign countries, right? And then Iceland was the only people who jailed the bankers in the 2008 crisis. In America, they took $1 trillion from the taxpayers, and then they give them another trillion to replace it with. And in Iceland, the same banking situation, they throw them in jail. And what do? They punish the guy for throwing their banking friends in jail. You can do just a little bit of research, and you can see that the people who funded the Panama Papers, they are the banking institution. And they're the ones who deliberately, don't you think they knew what would happen in Iceland? There would be protests and he would have to resign. Duh, it was so predictable, so contrived. So basically, you have these bankers who just overthrew a world leader. And no one figures it out. No one does anything about it. Why? Because he threw the bankers in jail. You see, that's what they're going to say to the next leader. You do that again and you'll end up the same or worse. And so I do, articles about that, about fluoridation, or about, Planet X is a pretty interesting topic. I've done a very lengthy article about that.
What do you think about Planet X?
I think there's at least a 1 out of 3 chance that it's real. In the 1980s, when I was doing research about the moon landings, I got a top executive at NASA on the phone talking to me privately, and he said, "Bart, the moon landings are fake."
Oh, did he?
Absolutely. And then he said, "But you really need to be making a movie about something more important." And I'm like, "Really? Tell me." He said, "In the second half of the second decade of the 21st century, there's going to be a passing of this rogue planet coming near Earth, and it's going to cause earthquake, volcanoes, meteor showers, and all this stuff." He said, "That's what you," and I was like, "Well, that's 35 years in the future, whatever." Well, here we are. And the way I look at it like this, Mark, is you have a flat tire about 1 out of every 1,500 trips in your car.
Mm-hmm.
However, it would be very, very foolhardy, in my opinion, not to have a jack and a spare tire with air in it and a flashlight, maybe first aid kit, right? Even though it's a 1 out of 1,500 chance. I've been studying Planet X for 10 years, and I say there's at least a 1 out of 3 chance that it's true. Now we're talking about a 1 out of 3 chance that 50 to 90% of the population will be dead within 5 to 10 years. That's a pretty serious possibility if you ask me. I would go to Sibrel.com, click on Conspiracy Corner, scroll down almost to the bottom of the Planet X story, and this guy I was talking to put me in touch with the guy who wrote a book about it. He's a scientist. He said this, and this would happen because of the gravitational effects of it coming near Earth. And I've read the Bible several times, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Don't you realize this is exactly what the Bible says is going to happen in the last days? An increase of earthquakes. The meteor showers. Jesus said there would be an increase of earthquakes in the last days. He said the stars would fall from the sky like ripe figs. That's a meteor shower. He said every mountain would disappear, every island would disappear. That's earthquakes and the effects of tidal waves from earthquakes. All these things. It says the sun would go black. An actual eclipse of the moon and the sun only puts a dark spot on about a 500-mile diameter area for about 10 minutes or so. But Planet X could cause an eclipse on the entire Earth for about 3 hours. And some believe it was a previous passing of that happened when Jesus was on the cross, and that's why it became dark from noon until 3 in the afternoon. Now, the interesting thing is Planet X is so dark you cannot see it with an optical telescope. You have to have what's called an infrared telescope. Well, the most powerful infrared telescope on the planet is owned by the Vatican. It's in Arizona. It's actually a 3-dimensional.
It's called Lucifer, telescope. Right?
There you go. You see? And so Lucifer is a nickname for Planet X. Planet X, according to the Chinese, which when it came by before, they called it the dragon. It was red, and it had meteor storm tails on both sides of it, so they called it the dragon. The book of John says that Satan, the dragon, comes to kill and steal and destroy. And so that they have named that telescope Lucifer because that's the nickname of the object it is tracking. In fact, Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit priest, and of course the Jesuits are the one who run the Lucifer telescope, he disavowed the order, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but almost word for word, they are tracking an object that will play a significant part in human history in the very near future. And I think they named it Lucifer because that's the nickname of Planet X, the dragon, Lucifer. And it's God's instrument for rebuking the world for being sinful. And it's all this great masterful clockwork. I don't know if you've ever seen inside of a grandfather clock and all this, but in my opinion, that's the way the stars, the constellations, the trajectories of the comets and asteroids, all that was mapped out from day one, that God could take a holiday, until from creation to now, and it would still go according to his plan because he already got it mapped out. Planet X is going to come nearby. I think that's why if you believe in New World Order, things like that, they don't want to go down in history as the next genocidal Hitler, so they're simply not telling people about Planet X to let Mother Nature depopulate the Earth for them.
Well, I remember years ago, I don't know, it was 2002, or New York Times, on the front page, I remember reading about this planet. It was right on the front page, and it was showing the orbit and everything. Now, and that it was supposed to come nearby. I know I read this. I wish I had cut it out.
I know there are people who saw things from magazines in the 1950s that were memory hold, since then, that talked about it coming near Earth in 50 years, from the 1950s. And it's like every new generation of scientists makes the same discovery over and over again, then it is suppressed. It's like this guy, Kelly Smith at NASA, he said, they can't go through the radiation belt until they develop that technology. I asked to talk to the guy as a journalist, verboten, he has been memory hold, you know what I mean? And then I asked, get this, well, the Orion spacecraft had 2 different Geiger counters on it. Can you please tell me the Geiger counter readings? You know what they said? That information is classified. Now, wait a minute. Is the temperature of the sun classified? Is the amount of helium in Jupiter's atmosphere classified? So why would the amount of radiation surrounding the Earth, why would a part of nature be classified? Because if disclosed, it would prove that they never went to the moon.
They never went to it. But just to finish this Planet X story, Stuart Swerdlow said if you ever get a chance to talk to him, he mentioned that it was destroyed. That powers that be, whoever here, because they may have technology that they use, which is probably way in advance than what they give us. So he says it was destroyed around in 2003, and that you see pieces of it flying into the sun. When you get that sun cam that NASA has up and you can see objects flying into it, that's remnants of Planet X, which was blasted out back in 2003. But it's
I think that's.
Go ahead.
I think that's misinformation. Planet X is probably right at 7 times bigger than the Earth, and all the nuclear bombs in the world times 10,000 would not destroy it.
So who knows what technology the powers that be have?
Yeah, but we have to remember that just in the past few months, scientists have said Planet X is real. Planet X is there because of the gravitational effects it has on the other planets and on the Kuiper Belt. So if the planet's destroyed, none of those effects would be taking place.
Yeah, this was supposed to be Modoc or something was the name of it. But they're always finding things out in the Kuiper Belt. I think like a brown star, I think they call it now, brown dwarf.
Yeah, people wonder whether Planet X is a large planet or a small unborn star. But the point is, it's probably going to affect life on Earth. In fact, if you look at the chart, a graph of earthquakes in the last 10 years, the amount of earthquakes have gone up 1,000%. What did Jesus say? that there would be an increase in earthquakes before his second coming. So if Planet X was destroyed, there couldn't be an increase of earthquakes because that's what causes it. I mean, that's what's causing the North Pole, which normally moves at a few feet a year, is moving. The magnetic North Pole that normally moves a few feet a year is moving at 579 feet a day.
A day.
A day.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah,
there has to be something huge causing that to happen.
yeah, but well, the powers that be, they could be causing they wrote part of the Bible, they changed it and rewrote it, and that part all about Revelation and everything is they wrote it so they can control what's going on now and make everyone think, oh, the end times is here.
Well, I don't think the Bible has been manipulated. I like the game Monopoly. And, Monopoly comes with rules. That's just kind of part of the way that it is. You have a game, you got rules. And this is the game of life, and we've got rules, the Bible. You're saying that God, who made the entire universe, every star, every planet, made the human brain, the human eye, the heart, made emotions, made creatures that can make art, that he doesn't have enough strength in his little finger to protect one book from being corrupted. I think he does have the strength to do it. I think the Bible is the Word of God, whether people like it or not. It's always a coincidence that the part of the Bible that people don't want to obey is coincidentally mistranslated in their opinion. It just is what it is. And I think God left us an owner manual, just like a box of Monopoly comes with the rules. I think it is the Word of God.
When do you see Planet X coming by the Earth?
Well, I would say probably as early as next year, probably 2017 to 2025. I was told 2 years ago by two different people in the military, the November 7th, 2016 presidential election is not going to happen.
Really?
And then, if you believe that people can have prophetic visions or dreams, two people who have a track record of being accurate in that department said the election was not going to take place. And then this is the most significant part. Janet Napolitano, just like Eisenhower had his, speech of the military-industrial complex the day before he resigned, the day Janet Napolitano, Homeland Security, resigned, she said a natural disaster is likely on its way, the likes of which the United States has never before seen. Now, we've seen volcanoes, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen, earthquakes and everything else. So the only natural disaster we have never seen before is something from outer space, a rogue planet, a comet, asteroid, meteor storm. And it's also the only natural disaster you could predict years in advance because of the geometry of the trajectory of all these heavenly bodies that can be calculated. You can't predict an earthquake or a volcano or a hurricane, you see. So I think something like that is coming. We'll see, but I would say it could be as early as next year, probably no later than 2025. Another recent military contact said he referred to Planet X as a comet, although it's called a planet with a comet-like orbit. He said 2022. Now, we don't know whether he's been given false information so that I share that with you now so that people won't get ready for it next year. If it is next year, I don't know. Again, I said there's at least a 1 out of 3 chance that it's true, and seeing how it will dramatically change life on Earth for everybody permanently, I'd say that's a frighteningly sobering possibility, even 1/3.
Well, Bart, why don't you plug your website and everything else again? We're getting close on time.
Yeah, just have listeners go to Sibrel, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, S-I-B-R-E-L.com, and you can click on the YouTube link and go watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, Astronauts Gone Wild, Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon, and click on the Conspiracy Corner and read articles about all these things as well.
So, are you saying that we may be stuck with Obama?
I didn't say the word stuck. That's a personal opinion. but let me put it this way. If you have a neighbor and you're stepping out to go to work and your neighbor's stepping out to go to work and he has an umbrella and he's got on rubber boots and he's got on a raincoat, even though there's not a cloud in the sky, what would you think?
I would think, maybe it's going to rain.
Exactly. Now, all of these executive orders, and they try to double speak it. If you call executive orders and executive memos, he has done more than any president. And half to 3/4 of them are about what to do in the event of a national emergency. Now, you don't write these laws to give yourself permission to break the Constitution unless you're planning on using those laws, right? He's suiting up with these executive orders and his rain boots and his raincoat and his umbrella, and he has, according to these executive powers, the right to stay in office and postpone the elections in the event of a national emergency.
Man, now that's some interesting.
So if I may throw one last little thing in there. Now, I don't vote anymore because I'd rather do something more profitable with my half an hour, like take a nap. But any person who's an outsider, whether it's Donald Duck or Donald Trump or maybe even a paper plate, as long as they're an outsider, I would vote for that person or entity. Now, if one of those people ends up potentially gaining momentum, I would highly suggest that they start contacting relations within the military now, so that they could, in the event, they can show proof of popular support behind them, so that they could maybe use the military under such circumstances to maintain more of a constitutional environment than other people might want. And I think, you should have a popularly elected person in office who's not part of the New World Order, whoever that might be. You know what I mean? And if there is some emergency coming down the pike, and this person who has public support, they need to, start negotiating right now with people in the military what to do under those circumstances, to keep a third-term president or to put that other person in office.
Well, that would explain a lot of things if this disaster is coming, because it seems like the government just is spending money and they don't care if the economy crashes, and they don't care about immigration, and they don't seem to care about anything.
Well, a member of Congress asked the Department of Homeland Security, why did you just buy enough ammunition to shoot every American 6 times?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're dumbfounded by that. I mean, they're stockpiling umbrellas because it's going to rain, right? And they're stockpiling all this stuff because they know some sort of event is coming down the pike, and the only event like that can't be predicted.
Maybe we're going to have an alien invasion.
Well, if there was, I'm sure it would be completely contrived because, last time I was in a hotel, 3 of the 10 movies were about space, right? Now, if 3 of the 10 movies were about how great NATO is, so it's sad.
Scrambling.
You're getting scrambled again, Bart. I don't know if it's the NSA or the CIA or whoever. You must be freaking some people out. I appreciate Bart. Great show, man. I'd love to have you back as soon as possible. Great discussion. Thanks, Solaris. Thanks, Anthea.
Thanks, everybody. Great show.
Take care.
Thank you, Bart.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hi, this is Bo.
And this is Rocco.
And the Bo and Rocco Show is here to offer insight into legal and lawful remedies. Our goal is to remain free and help others remain free in an ever-increasing police-like state. With the help of our guests, we try to answer questions such as what went wrong and what can we do about it.
So tune into Revolution Radio at www.freedomslips.com Wednesday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to listen to the Bo and Rocco Show.
You don't need to expect us.
We're already here.
Revolution Radio. Every Tuesday evening on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, we present our goddess spiritual warrior, Kathy Bilski.
I command I call to the architect of the universe's divine creators and ask for permission to quantum leap the world in all life forms on all planes and dimensions.